Good morning.
Good morning.
Blessing of the Lord be upon you.
We bless your name, Lord.
Thank you. Again, Minor Prophets. And this will be lesson number 73. This morning we are in an in-between, a transition period here for our studies. Finished up the book of Obadiah last week, and again, Obadiah was the minor prophet that talked about the destruction of Edom because of what they had done to the nation of Israel and the nation of Judah throughout its history, even, well, and then what was going to do in the destruction of Jerusalem and actually helping the Babylonians. So before we get into the minor prophets of the exile, which would be Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi, we're going to take a look at the destruction of Jerusalem and make sure that we have a good understanding of that. And I should have put another heading up here because the destruction of Jerusalem actually goes from about 606 down to 586 BC. Couldn't get everything that I wanted to on this particular frame for the screen. So looking at this, we need to go back and look at the reigns of the kings of Judah that led up to the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. So we've talked about Josiah before. He was the good king. After Hezekiah, you have, who was a good king. It took him a while to become a good king. He's had his efforts spared the southern kingdom from destruction by the Assyrian Empire. His son Manasseh was an evil king. His son Ammon was an evil king. Josiah comes along, and it takes him 18 years, down to about 621, 620 BC, before he actually starts reforming Judea to where go back, we're going to get rid of the pagans, we're going to get rid of idolatry, we're going to make sure that we're going back to the law of Moses, and that's because of the preaching of men like we just studied recently, Nahum, Habakkuk, prophets like that, and you have Jeremiah and Ezekiel, who are also prophesying in that time period. But in 609 BC, that's when Babylon is rising. Assyria is on the descent. Babylon is attacking Assyria. Egypt decides they're going to come up and help Assyria. So Josiah, unfortunately, goes up to Armageddon, Megiddo, and tries to stop Egypt. He dies in that battle in 609 BC, helping the Babylonians. So he dies. Jehoahaz, his son, becomes the king of Judah. But Pharaoh Necho comes down and basically puts Judah in subjection. And under Jehoahaz, they have to pay a huge tax, tribute to Egypt. But you notice he doesn't last very long. He lasts about 6 months because Babylon defeats in 606, well, eventually in 606, but Egypt gets taken out of the picture. Jehoahaz is taken away. Jehoiakim And when we get down to reading some of the biblical accounts, I told you before that Jehoahaz, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin are sons of Josiah. And I guess in some times in Scripture, brother, son, grandson are kind of mixed together in the Hebrew language. So you might see some places where it's the son, Jehoiakim would be the son of Jehoahaz, Jehoiachin the son of Jehoiakim. Some literature will say that these three were sons of Josiah, and then Zedekiah finally becomes, he's actually a brother of Josiah who becomes king here. So he would be the uncle of these. But again, because of translation difficulties, maybe not sure. Because I told you before, it looked like these three were brothers, Josiah's sons, three different mothers, which, what do you have? Blended family. Doesn't usually go too good in those circumstances. Anyway, Jehoiakim then, when Babylon takes control in the first invasion, starts in 608, but 606 is really when the destruction of Jerusalem, the first destruction, starts taking place, and we'll study that in a moment. Jehoiakim is appointed. His reign lasts 10 years. And then he rebels against Babylon, right? That's in 598. 597, Jehoiachin then is replaced. He rebels immediately. Second invasion, and Zedekiah is installed as the king. He does last 11 years. If you start from 596 to 586, that's a period of 11 years. But he finally rebels against Babylon. That's the third and final invasion when Jerusalem is destroyed. So that gives you the time frame. That gives you the kings, the final kings of Judah. You have any questions on that? So you know the time frame in history that we are talking about. So in prophecy, you have Jeremiah chapter 19, verses 1 through 15, that talks about this destruction that's taking place, going to take place. And in Ezekiel 24, verses 1 through 14. Now, we're not going to go to those because, you know, they're extended passages just talking about, hey, you're going to be destroyed. The Lord is fed up with you. You claim to be my people, the Lord's people, but you're not acting like it. And we'll see the reasons for that later. So destruction is coming upon them. And then the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. And that's where we really want to go to for our study. 2 Kings chapter 25. Verses 1 through 22. The fall and captivity of Judah. Right? So in the 9th year of his reign, and that's talking about who? Zedekiah. Right? In the 10th month, a day of the month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came with all his army against Jerusalem and laid siege to it. And they built siege works all around it. This is in the 9th year. Okay? Not the 11th year, but the 9th year. So how long is this siege going to last? 3 years. It's going to last 3 years. All right? Because you count the 9th, the 10th, and the 11th year. That's how, doesn't seem right, but that's how it comes out. They built the siege works around this, all around it. So the city was besieged till the 11th year of King Zedekiah. On the 9th day of the 4th month, The famine was so severe in the city that there was no food for the people of the land. Then a breach was made in the city, and all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate between the two walls, by the king's garden, and the Chaldeans, or the Babylonians, were around the city. And they went in the direction of the Arabah. Okay, that's kind of south and east. They would actually go probably north of the Dead Sea and over into the Arabian desert. Verse 5, but the army of the Chaldeans pursued the king and overtook them in the plains of Jericho. Okay, probably they would go west of the Dead Sea, down around. But in the plains of Jericho, and all his army was scattered from him. And they captured the king, who's that? Zedekiah, and brought him to the king of Babylon at Riblah, and they passed sentence on him. They slaughtered the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes, and put out the eyes of Zedekiah, and bound him in chains, and took him to Babylon. And there's some prophecy that Zedekiah would be taken to Babylon, but he would never see it. Well, how did that end up? Took his eyes out. They blinded him. All right, verse 22. And over the people who remained in the land of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had left, he appointed Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, son of Shaphan, governor. No more kings for a long time. Now you have governors. But remember, as these governors, they're typically in the line of David, in the lineage of David. All right? 2 Chronicles chapter 36. Some of this will be redundant. Verse 11 through 21. There. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. He did not humble himself before Jeremiah the prophet, who spoke from the mouth of the Lord. All right? So we're going to look at what Jeremiah said here in a little while, and how he didn't humble himself before the Lord. He also rebelled against King Nebuchadnezzar, who had made him swear by God. So here's Nebuchadnezzar. I'm going to make you king, Zedekiah, but I want you to swear by your God that you won't rebel against me, that you'll pay me tribute, and you'll do what I tell you to do. I swear by my God that that's what I'll do. And what does he do? He forswears his oath. Okay? He stiffened his neck and hardened his heart against turning to the Lord, the God of Israel. And here's one of the things. You go back to Pharaoh. What happens with Pharaoh? Pharaoh hardens his heart for what? The first 5 or 6 plagues? Then as the Lord continues with the plagues, it's the Lord, because of the continuance of the plagues, that continues the hardening of the heart. But it's always Pharaoh saying, I'm not going to do what the Lord says. Same way here. When you see God's people acting like Pharaoh, the kings of God's people acting like Pharaoh, name some. How about King Saul? Did King Saul act like Pharaoh? Yeah. Did Solomon act like Pharaoh? Yeah, he put people into slavery to build the temple even. And you can just go on down the line. Look at some of the ones that we've discussed in the minor prophets. They were acting like Pharaoh. They weren't acting like David. David was a man, what? After God's own heart. He didn't enslave the people, Israel. He put tribute on people like the Edomites, the Moabites, and the Ammonites. Why? Because they were attacking his people. So, here we go. Verse 14, and we want to go down through 21. All the officers of the priests, the people likewise, were exceedingly unfaithful. The priests were unfaithful. Exceedingly. The people were exceedingly unfaithful. What were they doing? They were worshiping idols, the pagan gods, following all the abominations of the nations, and they polluted the house of the Lord that he had made holy, that the Lord had sanctified that in Jerusalem. Verse 15, the Lord, the God of their fathers, sent persistently to them by his messengers, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. He had compassion. It's like, here are the elites, and what are they doing? They're acting like the nations around them, and down here are the people who are just trying to get along in everyday life and serve the Lord, and they're the ones that are being treated terribly. And the Lord had compassion on those. And it seemed like the elites were the ones who were getting along fine. Boy, they've got everything they need. People down here struggling. Who was the Lord trying to look after, or at least looking after? The ones down here, wanting to serve him in spirit and in truth. Who did he have compassion on in Egypt at the time of Moses? The ones who were in slavery, the ones who were being treated badly. So, he sent messengers to them, that's the prophets, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. See, his dwelling place, well, that was representative of his dwelling place in the temple. Verse 16, but they kept mocking the messengers of God, despising his words and scoffing at his prophets, until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people, until there was no remedy. Therefore, verse 17, he brought up against them the king of the Chaldeans, who killed their young men with the sword and the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion on young man or virgin, old man or aged. He gave them all into his hand, and all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and his princes, all these he brought to Babylon. And they burned the house of God, and broke down the wall of Jerusalem, and burned all the palaces with fire, and destroyed all its precious vessels. He took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and to his sons until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia. Until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia. That's going to be your next reference point in the exile. The period of the exile, when Persia arises. So remember that. To fulfill the word of the Lord, it's Sabbaths. Remember I told you about that? How many years? 490 years. 70 years they had to be in captivity to get back those 77-year periods where they weren't keeping the Sabbath, because that was the law of Moses. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. But remember, 490 years, that went back to how long was it that they weren't keeping the feast? How long was it that they hadn't kept the Passover? What happened? They forgot the Lord. It was a terrible thing. Now I've got Jeremiah down there, Jeremiah 52. Let's just turn over there for a minute. We might pull some stuff out of it. Jeremiah 52. That's the last chapter of Jeremiah. And it's got basically the same stuff here as what was in 2 Kings 25. But with Jeremiah, what comes after Jeremiah in the Bible? Remember? You should know it. Lamentations. And what's Lamentations about?
Bad times, sorrow, and grievances, wailing.
I'd say it's a sad time. It's crying.
Crying, weeping, going through Jerusalem after the destruction and saying, look at this. Look at this. Because it's destroyed, the temple's gone, people are gone, and after this, and we'll see later that there's a group that rebels against Gedaliah, the governor, and they kill them and some of the other Chaldeans, and they say, oh, we better leave. And they escape to Egypt, and they take Jeremiah with them, and that's how Jeremiah ends up in Egypt. So we'll look at, anyway, again, I don't want to get too far ahead, all right? But it talks about Zedekiah here, and it talks about, again, that breach and the temple being burned. Look down at verse 16. And Nebu-Zaradan, the captain of the guard, left some of the poorest of the land to be vine dressers and plowmen. Some of the poorest of the land. They took anybody that could serve as slaves and put them into exile in Babylon. Verse 24, and the captain of the guard took Sariah, the chief priest, and Zephaniah, the second priest, and the three keepers of the threshold, and from the city he took an officer who had been in command of the men of the war, and 7 men of the king's council who were found in the city. And the second, well, it just go down through there and look at it. So Judah, at the end of verse 37, so Judah was taken into exile out of its land. And the number of the people who Nebuchadnezzar carried away captive in the 7th year, 3,023 Judeans. Okay. In the 18th year, he carried away captive 832 persons. In the 23rd year, Nebu-Zaradan, the captain of the guard, carried away captive of the Judeans 745 persons. All the persons were 4,600. How many people came out of Egypt? Remember what you're talking about? 6 million, 600 and some thousand fighting men. Of Judah, maybe 100,000 fighting men. And this is after a period of time, Judah and Benjamin are together. The exile is only 4,600 people. And all that's left in the land are the poorest, a few plowmen and vine dressers. How many people died by sword. How many people starved to death?
Started off with 6 million, didn't he?
But you take off 10 tribes
Okay.
with Assyria in the north, but just with Judah, if there was 100,000 fighting men with Judah and Benjamin, you might have, if you take it times 2 for the women, 200,000, say 3 kids each. Let's just say there was just 1 million people. That'd probably be a low estimate. Don't you think? 4,000 people. Now do you realize what a remnant is? A remnant. And that's just the physical. We're not talking about spiritual. We're talking about the physical kingdom. Okay. The last part of that, Jehoiachin released from prison. Jehoiachin was taken into captivity. Zedekiah put in his place. He's over there, he's in prison, but after the destruction of Jerusalem, he's allowed to come out of prison, and he is set up, he gets to eat at the king's table. He ends up pretty good out of a whole bunch of them. But again, it is the destruction of Jerusalem was complete. So, now we're going to go back. It's about time-wise. I'm going to read some stuff, okay? I know it's boring. But
No,
it is to a degree, okay? This is from a website called God Answers. So, here's some things. I don't know their position on a lot of things, but historically, it's got some good stuff in it. Date-wise, there might be some years off here and there, because I've told you before, chronologically, we don't know exactly dates, because some kings here and there, and we do know that if we're talking about, say, 605 BC, we know that Jesus was born probably in 6 BC, because they made an error in setting it up, because he had to be born before Herod died, and Herod died in 4 BC. So don't pay attention a lot of attention to the dating. Now later on, when we get into the book of Haggai, especially, and even Zechariah, dates become a little more important just for putting things in perspective. And when we look, we're going to take a look at some things in the book of Daniel too, and it'll be important just to lead up to those post-exilic, post-exilic prophets. Okay, we got to get through the exile, and then we'll get into post-exilic prophets. All right, so the struggle between Judah and Babylon was long and ultimately disastrous for Judah. Yeah. During the reign of King Jehoiakim, 609 to 697, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up, and Jehoiakim became his servant for 3 years. Okay? That's in 2 Kings 24, verse 1. The beginning of Jehoiakim's servitude was 605 BC. Well, we say this, the destruction of Jerusalem, or the second invasion, or the first invasion of Jerusalem was 606. 605 is close enough, okay? But 3 years later, so it's 3 years, Judah's king rebelled against Babylon, refusing to pay the tribute. Nebuchadnezzar quelled the rebellion and took prisoners back to Babylon. Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego among them. First exile. And talked about that just a moment ago. So many were taken back in that first exile. After Jehoiakim's death in 597 BC, his 18-year-old son, which there, he says son, others say it's his brother, Jehoiachin being Jehoiakim's brother, became king, reigning for 3 months and doing evil in God's sight, according to 2 Kings 24, 8, 9. What does that mean? He's worshiping idols and fooling around politically instead of trusting in the Lord, right? During Jehoiachin's reign in 597 BC, King Nebuchadnezzar besieged the city of Jerusalem. That's why we say 596 is the second invasion. Close enough. Jehoiachin gave himself up. He surrenders. What's he going to do? It's Babylon. And we have the following report. The king of Babylon took him prisoner in the 8th year of his reign and carried off all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold in the temple of the Lord, which Solomon, the king of Israel, had made. Now, Solomon was about 950, if my calculations are right, and so that's 300. Almost between 300 and 400 years, close enough, that they had been there, survived all that time. And all the officials and all the money, in the temple of the Lord, which Solomon the king of Israel had made, as the Lord had foretold, he carried away all Jerusalem and all the officials and all the mighty men of valor, 10,000 captives. That doesn't quite square with what we read just a little while ago, did it? Okay. And all the craftsmen and smiths, none remained except the poorest of the land. This second deportation of Jews to Babylon included the priest Ezekiel, who later wrote the book that bears his name. So, first invasion, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are taken to the capital. Second invasion, Ezekiel, who was a priest and a prophet, goes, but he doesn't go to the capital, he goes to the river Kibar. And he gets to prophesy to the people who are gathered up there. Follow me? So he's going to prophesy to the people up there, don't worry. God's prophesied this, it's going to be terrible, but it's going to be, short-lived. The people will eventually go back. And remember, he prophesies about a new temple. Right? Change. There we go. The nation of Judah continued to exist under Babylonian rule. This is after the 606 invasion, with King Zedekiah installed in Jerusalem as a puppet king. But Zedekiah too rebelled, and Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came with all his army against Jerusalem and laid siege to it. Remember, we read that? And they built siege works all around it, so the city was besieged till the 11th year of King Zedekiah. So it was in the 9th year, right? And until the 11th year, so that's 3 years. That's 2 Kings 25, verses 1 through 2. 595 BC. Now, why was the king of Babylon, why was Nebuchadnezzar so upset with Zedekiah? It's been 11 years. He's let him reign for 11 years. Right? Well, he's given him several warnings. In 595 BC, after, we would say, or right about the time of the second invasion, an envoy of 5 kingdoms, including Edom, Where do we hear about Edom? Book of Obadiah, right? And other passages, but especially Obadiah. Arrive in Jerusalem to join their forces and defend against Nebuchadnezzar. Who are they? Well, it's Edom, Moab, Ammon, Philistia, which I believe that's Tyre and Sidon, and Judah. But where do they meet? In Jerusalem. Because, here's the map. Here's Jerusalem and Judah. Edom, Moab, Ammon are over here. Philistia is over here. Where's Judah? It's in the middle. Jerusalem's in the middle. Hey, let's all get together. Let's get together over here in Jerusalem. And Zedekiah says, okay, I'm the king. Let's get together here. And they get together there. And what this is really telling us is we don't know who started this, but once they get to Jerusalem, Zedekiah kind of takes the lead. And that's not good. Right? Jeremiah, the prophet, goes to them, orders the kings to surrender to Nebuchadnezzar or be destroyed, despite recently capturing Arad and the Negev cities. That's what Zedekiah has done, or from Zedekiah. The Edomites are welcomed into Jerusalem. So the Edomites have been attacking Judah, but they're welcome. What? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. However, like most of Zedekiah's political and military decisions, the Edomites will betray him and burn the Jerusalem temple down and help loot the city as possible allies of the Babylonians. So whenever it says that Nebuchadnezzar does this, he lays the siege works, yeah, but when it comes into the city, when it says he takes the city and he does this and he does that, you know who's taking a large part in that? Edomites. Remember we talked about that in the book of Obadiah. And Jeremiah 27, 2 and 3, I think that's talking about where the prophecy that Jeremiah, the Lord tells him, put on straps of iron and leather and what have you, and go and prophesy. Yeah, thus the Lord said to me, make yourself straps and yoke bars and put them on your neck. Send word to the king of Edom, the king of Moab, the king of the sons of Ammon, the king of Tyre, and the king of Sidon, by the hand of the envoys who have come to Jerusalem to Zedekiah, king of Judah. Now Jeremiah continues to describe the retribution for not following the Lord. But what does he mean? Put on these straps and these bars and stuff. Submit yourself to Babylon, especially Judah. Babylon is the Lord's avenger for all the evil that you have done. The kings and the priests who have turned away from the Lord, go into exile and it'll be all right. It'll be better for you to just... That's a pretty tough message, isn't it? But he gives it for all of those nations. And what do? Well, we know what happens with Edom. It takes a while. It takes several hundred years for them to finally be destroyed. So the city fell in 586 BC according to 2 Kings 25, 9 through 12. After the destruction of Jerusalem, Gedaliah was placed in charge as a governor in Judah. 2 Kings 25, verse 22. He was killed 2 months after his appointment, 7 months after the fall of Jerusalem, causing many of the remaining Jews to flee to Egypt in fear of their lives. Hey, this is who Nebuchadnezzar appointed to be governor, and he sent all these other Chaldeans, Babylonians, to rule over us, and we slaughtered them. We better run. But they take Jeremiah with them, and he's forced to go to Egypt. This is after he's written the book of Lamentations. Or maybe he writes the book afterwards, but it's about the destruction of Jerusalem. Do you see how this all falls into this historical account so we can get the picture of it? So, the book of Kings ends, or 2 Kings, ends with King Jehoiachin being released from prison in Babylon. This is a few years later. And given freedom to dine at the king's table in Babylon. Because that's what kings do. You ever notice that? They destroy a country, but they take the king and make them one of their friends. And marry their daughters, and hoping that there'd be peace. That's how you make peace. Destroy them all except the king. Though originally a king, Jehoiachin became a foreign prisoner of war and was thankful to be released from prison. These dire events had all been predicted by God's prophets. The Jews' exile in Babylon lasted for 70 years, as Jeremiah predicted in Jeremiah 25:12. Then the Jews were allowed to return to Jerusalem and start rebuilding. That period of history is described in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay? But there's a book that comes in between that that's very important for understanding history. The history of God's people as a nation, so to speak. All right? And that's the book of Daniel. So, what are we going to do next week? Next week we'll pick up from there. And what happens to Daniel? And then when we get to the book of Haggai, we'll understand. Now we kind of understand what Haggai is talking about and pick up with these exiles returning to Jerusalem. And why does the Lord have to send prophets to them now? What's going on with them? Okay, so now your turn. Question.